sweat the small stuff. And it may be, gotta stay with the mic, it may be that we need to worry about the small stuff most of all. And James Madison, the father of the Constitution, the father of the Bill of Rights, happens to agree with me on this topic. On June 6, 1788, at the Virginia Ratifying Convention, when they were arguing over adopting the Constitution, he observed that throughout history, there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by sudden and violent usurpations. So it's not the sudden imposition of a theocracy that we need to be worried about. It's the incessant erosion of Jefferson's wall. It's the death by 1,000 cuts. It's the creeping normalcy of government policy dictated from the pulpit. That's what we need to be worried about. So the oath, the pledge, coins, the nativity scenes, crosses, the National Day of Prayer, prayer breakfasts, all of these things are important. And they're important for two reasons. First, they are used to justify other, more serious violations. And second, they're symbolic. Oftentimes, I think we underestimate the power of symbols, and I think that underestimation can come at a very heavy cost. So I'm going to look at each of these two reasons in turn, and then I'm going to look at two cases a bit more in depth that I think help illustrate these 2 points. And then I'll take any questions you guys might have. But before I get going, I need to address one small vocabulary issue because my opponents have a knack for taking people out of context and cutting video and all kinds of fun things. So I just want to say that I don't actually think there are small violations, as you will understand from this talk. Separation means separation, not something less. It's not a fine line that's easily overstepped. It's a principle, and it's either violated or it's not. And if we don't stand on principles, we're not going to get where we want to go. But because some people think that these are small violations, for the sake of this talk, I'm going to use the term small. Just pretend I'm doing this every time I say it. So the first problem with these small violations is that they're used to justify other violations. So how many people have been in an argument about the separation of state and church, the idea that we're a Christian nation, that we're founded on Judeo-Christian principles, any one of these things? Raise your hand. Okay, almost everybody. How many of you have heard, let's just stick with in God we trust or one nation under God, used to support your opponent's argument? Hey, so quite a few of you. I do this for a living, and it comes up almost every single time. State legislators, city councilors, whoever it is, it almost always comes up. And I think there's a scientific theory that may well apply to this situation. Has anybody ever heard of broken windows theory? A couple of people nodding their heads. Okay, this gained a little bit of popularity with Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. Freakonomics also mentioned it. It was proposed in 1982 by Wilson and Kelly. And basically what broken windows theory hypothesizes is that perceiving existing disorder will lead to more disorder. So if you take disorder to mean crime, and we take one broken window in a building to be a crime, that's going to lead to other broken windows, and more broken windows, and eventually to property crime like graffiti, and then possibly more serious crime, even violent crime. So basically you can take two things from this. When nobody cares about the little things, it's going to lead to more little things. And petty crime is not only contagious, but it's a gateway to worse crime. And there's actually some good scientific experiments to back this up. Compelling evidence for broken windows theory. A lot of people cite the drop in New York City's crime rate. I'm just going to say that I don't necessarily agree that that's the case. If anyone wants to talk to me about that later, they can. I prefer experiments to provide my evidence. And Kieser, Lindenberg, and Stegg published their findings in Science in 2008 in an article called The Spread of Disorder. And they were trying to test whether or not broken windows theory works. And they did something a little bit ingenious here. They had one setting that was the control, where there was absolutely no disorder, and then one setting that was the experiment where there was some disorder, and they're trying to test broken windows theory. So what they did is they attached these flyers to each of the bikes. So the experimenters went down, put a little flyer on the bike. And they wanted to see whether people were going to be more likely to litter that flyer, so to break the rule of no littering, when they had seen that a different rule had been broken. The other rule that had been broken was the graffiti rule. So if you're a European, you know that a sign with a red circle around it means don't. So this means don't do graffiti on this alleyway. So you can see here there's plenty of graffiti, so everybody can see that this rule has been broken. So in the orderly condition, which was free from graffiti, 33% of the people littered the flyer. In the disorderly condition, 69% of the people littered the flyer. If you're a science nerd, that's a really high p-value, less than 0.001, very statistically significant. Another experiment they did centered around this public mailbox. So that's the red thing in the background there. And they took a mailer, an envelope, with a plastic window in the front so you could see the address label on the papers inside. And instead of an address label, they put cash, stuffed a bunch of euros in there. And then they put it in the public mailbox, but they left it hanging out. So anybody walking by would see this cash just sitting there to be taken. And then they had a mailbox with no graffiti and no litter around it, a mailbox with graffiti but no litter, and then a mailbox with litter but no graffiti. In the control, no litter, no graffiti, 13% of people walking by stole that money. With litter but no graffiti, 27%. Again, about double, the same as last. With graffiti, no litter, about 25%. Again, double. Also statistically significant. So this suggests not only that violations lead to other violations, but that they lead to worse violations. I mean, you're just talking about graffiti, and now you have people stealing money. And remember the story that I told you about Christine? Things started off small. It was just an assignment. Why are you crossing out Christ on his birthday? And then it was another assignment. And then it was actually violence towards children. Things started off small, nothing was done. Everybody saw that the administration was okay with it, and things got worse from there. Now, violating the Constitution is actually a crime. It's not something that you would go to jail over, but the government has no particle of spiritual jurisdiction, according to Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist number 69. So when it exercises a power that it has not been given, say, to have a national day of prayer, or to put religion on our coins, it's exercising a power that we, the people, did not give it. So the criminology context can be very like the constitutional context. And our legal system is uniquely suited to looking for evidence of broken windows. We operate on a common law system where court cases, current cases, are built on previous cases. And you look at the written opinions and you can go back. So you can actually trace the impact of these broken windows through written court precedent. And if you do that, you do see these violations. So in 2004, and I'll work backwards chronologically, in a case that essentially upheld under God and the pledge by doing the case on standing, Justice O'Connor wrote that there are no de minimis violations of the Constitution, no constitutional harms so slight that the courts are obliged to ignore them. And then she went on to say that in God we trust is perfectly acceptable on our money, and as is the court opening its sessions with God Save the United States and this honorable court, which the Supreme Court does every time. Going back, in Allegheny versus ACLU, a 1989 case that actually struck down a nativity on public land but upheld a menorah, they cited the National Day of Prayer, God Save the United States, congressional chaplains, capital prayer, in God we trust, and legislative prayer. In Lynch versus Donnelly, upholding the nativity on public land, they cited President Washington's proclamations of Thanksgiving, congressional chaplains, in God we trust, and one nation under God we pledge. In Marsh versus Chambers, 1983, they cited God Save the United States in this honorable court. And in one of the first decisions interpreting the Establishment Clause in 1952, Zorak versus Clausen, which upheld religious release time classes, for those of you who I was discussing that with earlier, they cited prayers in our legislative halls, presidential appeals to the Almighty, and so help me God in courtroom mode. So you can see these little things are being used to back up bigger violations. And in that Zorak versus Clausen case, the last case I mentioned, Justice Douglas added, a fastidious atheist or agnostic could even object to the supplication with which the court opens each session. God save the United States and this honorable court. Damn right. We should have. We missed our opportunity. we can bring down their whole house of cards by attacking these small violations. Because the small violations do in fact lead to larger violations. So whether or not broken windows theory is valid in the criminal context, it certainly seems valid in the constitutional context. Second reason. The second reason that courts use these violations to uphold other violations is because they show a disrespect for the separation of church and state. They're symbols. Just like that first broken window symbolizes that it's okay to break windows, these violations are symbols. And again, I think this is a fault of the atheist movement.